Welcome, everyone, to the Australian Bitcoin podcast. You're listening to myself, Justin, and Jeremy from hardblock.com.au. Contact Hardblock if you're interested in finding out how to pay as low as 99 sats for your Bitcoin withdrawal fees. In today's episode, we'll be discussing recent global and local Bitcoin news. How's it going, Jeremy?
Pretty good, Justin. How are you?
Yeah, can't complain.
So how many hours of Bitcoin Miami did you end up watching?
If I'm being honest, about 35 hours over the course of the weekend and a little bit yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was on usually 1.25 and up to 1.5 times speed. So it's probably like 40 hours of content or something.
Incredible. So what were the highlights?
Well, I want to say, like, generally, I think as these conferences get bigger, they do become more commercialized. So there was probably more shitcoining and talk of stable coins in there than what I expected from a Bitcoin conference. However, as I got further into like the mining stage and the open source stage, there wasn't really much of that at all. So that was good to, like, from a very general perspective, is that it didn't seem totally commercial, even though there was a couple of snippets in there that might make you think that. But I'm going to just list probably what I think people should look into, and then I guess we'll talk about some more specific announcements. But I reckon the ones that people should see, and the problem with the way that it's recorded and uploaded to YouTube is I can't link each individual one of these talks. So I'm just going to mention what they are, and if you come across them in your travels and are wondering, should I spend the 45 minutes to listen to this thing? If this is one of the ones that I mentioned, maybe give it a bit of time. So there was one with Michael Saylor and Kathy Wood, which was all about institutional adoption. There was another with Adam Curry, who is kind of the father of podcasting, as well as Francis Ngannou. I probably pronounced that wrong, but he's the UFC heavyweight champion, and Max Kaiser. So the three of them talked about the fuck you money culture that's a part of Bitcoin. There was also a really good one titled Bitcoin is Freedom Money with Alex Gladstein, Yeonmi Park, who escaped North Korea to China and then eventually to America. There was a couple of people also involved in that talk from various other places that have humanitarian crises ongoing. And it was all about the positive humanitarian impacts of Bitcoin. There was a really good one with Jordan Peterson, a fireside chat, that one was called, which was all about Bitcoin, free markets, and entrepreneurship. There was a really good one with Breedlove, Guy Swan, and Parker Lewis about becoming a sovereign individual. There was one about wartime Bitcoin with Francis. He runs Bull Bitcoin. I won't try to pronounce his name, as well as Alex Svetsky and a few others. And those last two, the becoming a sovereign individual and wartime Bitcoin, were just really good at a conceptual level of what Bitcoin is meant to be in regards to those censorship-resistant, permissionless, open and decentralized properties, which was really cool. I'd say the mining stage, generally speaking, if you're into mining, you could probably watch the vast majority of those and be, they're very informative. And for someone who's not into mining so much, I guess the main takeaways was that big players are scaling exponentially in the mining space. It's not slowing down. They're really trying to smash down whatever barriers are still left. And it looks like in future there's going to be some pretty significant mergers between energy companies and the Bitcoin mining sector. The home mining, this is just trying to make sense of my notes. This is a particular episode or a particular segment on the mining stage. There was one called the home mining with Matt Odell, Diverter BTC, and Econo Alchemist. So that was really cool. That was obviously quite different to like institutional mining and more about how do you mine Bitcoin at home and do it in a sort of safe and privacy conscious way. So that's really worth checking out.
And is that with S9s? Like, that sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, so they had both. If you would do it on a small scale like S9s, they had some tips in there. It's sort of like running it in an esky or, like something like that. And then Econo Alchemist has quite a comprehensive setup that he's now got in a shipping container, which is all, I don't know about all, but it's majority of S19. So it's all the way from like, you're just getting started as a home miner, what kind of things should you consider? Scaling all the way up to like, okay, you're really into Bitcoin mining and now you got 20 or 30 miners. How do you not burn your house down?
Yes.
How do you not get like a divorce because of the noise? There was also a really cool one, like a new product that basically runs at around 200 watts and it produces around 1 to 2 terahash. And you can have it sitting by your bedside table and sleep at night with it running, and you won't even hear it.
Wow.
Can't remember the name of the product, to be honest, but if you listen to that or watch that segment, they talk about it a fair bit. And I would imagine we'll be seeing more of that kind of stuff in the space. Home miners that are least invasive in terms of the heat and the sound qualities.
That's pretty. I'll definitely check that one out.
So I'll just rattle off a few from the open source stage, because that was probably about 20 hours of content if you want to watch all of it. But I think there were some decent ones that are worthwhile checking out. So I guess firstly, just overall, it's good to see Lightning Development Kit and the Bitcoin Development Kit, which are like standardized ways of being able to implement certain features into either Lightning or Bitcoin wallets. That's really, powering ahead by the looks of it. There's a lot more privacy and smart contract capability coming to Bitcoin. So generally speaking, that was my vibe from the open source stage over those 3 days. But if you're looking for specific ones to watch, there was one with Jameson Lopp, Luke Dash Jr., and Shinobi and Brian Bishop, which was all about the threats to Bitcoin and what can be done essentially to try to resolve it to some degree. And a lot of the threats came back to things that we're probably all aware of, like shitcoins or cryptocurrency being a potential attack, over-regulating being a potential attack, and even a governance attack from within Bitcoin itself. Certain people always trying to block upgrades, and the belief that, upgrading Bitcoin would be bad for Bitcoin. So a lot of nuance there, but worthwhile checking out.
It's quite interesting that this is kind of a parallel to the real, I suppose, innovation that's happening, where you've got the front stage is all the kind of institutional and government trying to have a say, I suppose, in Bitcoin. And over in the backstage is where the real work is happening in the open source stage. And, just stuff like, trying to tell people how to make a Bitcoin wallet and how to interact with it sounds a bit boring, but that's actually how things get done. And yeah,
really true. And my partner, my fiance, said to me, what were the announcements? And I won't say the announcements now because we'll talk about them in just a bit. But the thing is, the announcements to me weren't as exciting as all of the open source stage and the mining things, which are not necessarily announcements. They're just stuff that's already been working on that most people don't care about. And most people probably won't even care about it even when they're using it, because they won't realize that they're using it. But those were the things to me that made me think, this is great because Bitcoin's taking off in adoption sense now. But what about 10 years time or 20 years time? What's to say that we're not doing ourselves in by not prioritizing, say, privacy, or not decentralizing mining properly? And to see that there's actually a whole lot of work being done in that space is really reassuring, even if most people won't tune into that or won't really care about it. So yeah, there's sort of the front of house stuff, which is this is the stuff you put in the headlines for mainstream media. And then there's all the back of the house stuff, which is like for hardcore Bitcoiners, but it's probably the most important stuff, really.
I think it's an advantage that it is hidden away, because by the time they've actually built it and it's all out there, it's too late for anyone to do anything about it.
Very true. And that is probably a good segue. Like the last three that I wanted to mention from the open source stage, one was Lightning Labs Chief Technology Officer. I won't try to pronounce his whole name, but he was just going by Olalu. And he has a BIP, so a Bitcoin implementation proposal around Taro, which is essentially a taproot type implementation that allows assets to be issued on the Lightning Network. By assets, it could be stablecoins, could be shitcoins, could be NFTs, could be anything, basically. Very, very similar to other layer 3 solutions like RGB. If you've sort of seen any of our posts on Twitter before, we've mentioned that one. And even things like Synonym. So it's good to see that there's another type of layer 3 solution that's going to bring a bit better privacy and a bit better interoperability. But the last two that are sort of more related to that point that you made about this development can kind of get to a certain point where it's past the tipping point, I guess, where it can't be stopped. There was one all about coin joins, coin swaps, and sidechain type swaps, which was with Evan Kaludis, Ben the Carmen, and Craig Raw. That was really cool. Good to see that there's something called LN Vortex, or Lightning Network Vortex, that Ben is working on to try to make it so when you open a channel to join the Lightning Network, it's kind of like you're doing a coin join. So you'd be joining with a bunch of other people, which makes it very difficult to know whose channel belongs to whom. So it kind of brings some of that much needed privacy to Lightning. But he had a really funny comment where he's talked to his lawyers about what is legal when it comes to privacy in Bitcoin. The legal advice was, don't call it coin joins anymore, and don't call it for privacy. What you're doing is you're doing collaborative transactions to reduce fees for your business and personal benefit. And all of a sudden, it becomes a very legal thing. It's not about coin joining and privacy.
We're reducing fees.
Exactly right. There was another really, really cool segment on the Lightning Network, the fact that it is not private. There's a lot of attack vectors, but there's a lot being done to solve that. And that was with Anthony, Evan Kaludis, Nifty Nye, and Shinobi again. So that one was really good. If you get a chance to watch it, please do. If you use Lightning a lot, they go at a relatively basic level so everyone can understand, but then really dive into the weeds. We'll have further podcasts coming out with people like Rusty Russell and Lloyd to talk a bit about things like Lightning privacy. But if you're keen to know more about it now, I'd say check out that segment. And that's, gone on for a while there, but those are my highlights. I think those are the things that are worthwhile looking at, and that might save you a bit of time. But generally speaking, I've enjoyed the time I put into it.
Sounds like you're probably a bit tired as well.
Indeed, there's too much content. I think it's becoming a bit overwhelming. I think no more podcasts. No more conferences for a little while.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the highlights. Did you? Because I think I've probably done a bit of a blanket there and done everything. Was there any that you kind of had seen that jumped out to you, or should we maybe jump into the announcements that were at the
Well,
the
I
conference?
think the one that sticks out to me is an announcement, so maybe I'll jump to that one.
Yeah.
I think probably a lot of people would have tuned into Jack Mallers because last year he had the El Salvador announcement, and that's what I did. And his announcement was maybe not as big as a country, but it's still pretty big because basically what it enables is you're paying for Bitcoin, paying Bitcoin for your coffee. Now, you can do that in El Salvador, but a lot of people brush it off because it's not really a country. Most people even know where it is. But what he's going to allow is for you to be able to so his company Strike is integrated with a company called Blackhawk, which does point of sale systems, which sounds kind of boring until you realize who they actually support. Blackhawk enables payments for McDonald's, Starbucks, Aldi, Safeway, Whole Foods, like a lot of really big companies in America. And it'll happen sometime in 2022, where basically you can go to any of these places, ask to pay in Lightning. They'll show you a Lightning code and you can pay with it. You can use Strike, the Strike wallet, or you can use any Lightning compatible wallet, which is incredible. So basically, you can go to Starbucks and order a coffee and pay in Bitcoin. And that's kind of like the thing that people had always tried to figure out, 10 years ago. Like, how do we go and how does this thing work for coffee? What's going to work this year? I think that's a pretty amazing announcement. There's also an integration with Shopify, which is one of the more common e-commerce solutions for websites. So you'll be able to go again, use Lightning to pay for things through websites. And there's another one, NCR, which to be honest, I forget what that one is, but it's another payment integration. So pretty amazing. I think terrible if you're, say, PayPal or even Afterpay. Like, there's now so much competition for this payment integration. And for the merchant, like, they're going to be given these choices, and if they go straight to Lightning, they can have zero merchant fees. So I think that was a huge one for me.
And a lot of people have seen this as like a sneaky backdoor way of making Bitcoin legal tender in the US, because rather than trying to pass legal tender laws, all they're doing is they're making Lightning payments available to merchants and to users, which makes it just a very common cultural thing for people to do, to spend in Bitcoin, which naturally then makes people want to learn more about Bitcoin or maybe save a bit in Bitcoin as well. And yeah, to me, that's how you would push something like legal tender of Bitcoin in America, is just through this backdoor, get everyone used to it, get everyone using it, get everyone liking it, and then the next part becomes a no-brainer. So yeah, very, very cool announcement, and pretty wide-ranging, especially like you say, most people dismiss the El Salvador news, but this one is, I think, much harder to dismiss.
Yeah, and you have to think that we're going to get that here. Maybe it's next year. But if in America that's what they're doing, surely we're going to get this tech in Australia. Even if it's not Strike, someone else will probably want to come and do it. But
that's right. A lot of those companies that operate over there are operating here too. So it would make sense if they're saving on merchant fees. If it's sometimes it's even a bit of an advertising thing where you can say, hey, we've got this new way of paying, or hey, we're hooking into this Bitcoin culture thing, come spend with us. I think companies want to do that as part of their marketing, and then it just becomes a simple decision of doing that here too. So other announcements, any other ones that kind of jumped out at you? Yeah,
so we didn't get the big country announcement that I think we were all hoping for. So there's a couple of small regions that Samson Mow is involved in. So Prospera, which is an island off the north coast of Honduras. I'm probably pronounced these wrong. And Madeira, which is a region in Portugal. I guess, to be honest, that's to me less interesting than El Salvador last year, because it's not, I haven't even heard of those countries or regions. But it's good, but it's not nothing kind of major. Mexico is apparently proposing a bill. But yeah, we didn't really kind of get that next kind of step up of a country that's much larger than El Salvador doing this.
That's true. And Samson had really teased, he's got 3 big mic drop moments. And I don't think any of them were totally a mic drop moment. Maybe when you combine the 3 together, it's starting to get to one. But even Stacy from like the Max Kaiser and Stacy, I think her last name's Herbert or Aber, however you pronounce that. She asked I think you'd call it like the president of Prospera or the CEO, because it's actually a private company. She asked him, how many people will this impact? How many people live there? And he said, couple of hundred. And she sort of laughed and said, that's a very small amount. So for someone who is so keen on state adoption, for her to even see that as a relatively small scale thing is kind of telling in some way. She wasn't hyping it like Samson was. She was a bit more, you
almost wonder if they booked the spot at the conference, but then just didn't get the approval through in time or something like that. Like maybe there is something coming, but they just couldn't get it through in time.
Yeah, that's right. I think the only other announcement from Samson was that his new company called Jan3, I guess that's how it's pronounced, has signed a memorandum of agreement with El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, that is, regarding building out their digital infrastructure. Not really clear exactly what that means, apart from maybe being to do with things like the Bitcoin bond, integrating more Bitcoin type payments or other types of stable coins. So look, overall, Bitcoin's moving forward. It's getting adopted in more places, but there wasn't the huge nation state adoption announcement that I think most of us thought we were going to hear. I mean, I was pretty crazy. I thought we might even hear 2.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that was quite positive was listening to Michael Saylor at the start of the conference talk about his interpretation of the American, movements in the last month or so, is that even though they don't specifically talk about, and there's an executive order from Biden, he interprets that as like they're kind of endorsing Bitcoin, even though it's not formally written that way. So I think you could probably read that pretty positively as well.
Absolutely. There was a few segments there was one that was called like $1 billion fund manager outlook or perspective or something along those lines. And basically just talking to, there's like the 3rd richest man in Mexico. There was a few other fund managers and Greg Foss. And they essentially were saying that the brakes are put on getting into Bitcoin at the moment for large institutional investors, but they are dipping their toe in as much as they can. And as soon as the brakes come off, that's when we'll see this, wall of fiat currency to try to integrate into Bitcoin. So all of that still sounds very, very favorable to me.
Yeah, definitely. And then another one, Blockstream are partnering with Tesla and Block to do some solar-powered mining. Not exactly sure how effective that would be. It seems like a little bit of a marketing stunt because if you're going to use solar power into a battery, into a mine, that's kind of a lot of conversions. It's not very energy efficient. But it's interesting that they felt the need to make this type of announcement. It seems like more of a marketing ploy than an actual kind of long-term play, when you've also got a lot of people announcing, we'll talk about later, like natural gas type mining. So
that's right. I agree with that. It seems more like hey, look, you can do a, in quotations, completely sustainable mining setup using all of Tesla's products. And that, I'm sure, for some institutional investors or some people sitting on the outskirts thinking Bitcoin's bad for the environment, maybe that gets them just over the line.
To ticks a box somewhere. Yeah,
that's it. But otherwise, I don't think that's not huge news. I think the size of it was something like $12 million is their mine. So when you've got most other Bitcoin miners are worth $1 billion or more, it's a pretty small amount that they're doing, especially for pretty large companies in the space too.
Yeah, it's nothing for them.
Well, that's probably it for the Bitcoin conference. I do think there's more videos that have been posted up in the last, just 12 hours or so from some of those stages. So there could be some more just general stuff that's worthwhile watching, but it doesn't sound like there's any other big announcements that, you're worthwhile knowing about. So I guess we'll move on to Australian news. Don't want to repeat too much of this because some of the stuff we've talked a little bit about before, or at least this main one, which is OTR or On the Run, which has over 100 different outlets in Australia, are accepting Bitcoin payments starting in July. It's not just Bitcoin payments, though. It's other cryptocurrencies too. So you could even pay with Dogecoin and probably Ripple and basically whatever is available through crypto.com, because they're using crypto.com as an intermediary to process the payments for them. We talked a bit about that in a previous episode that we did on, what was the episode even on?
I can't remember. It was last week. Yeah. It was when I walked past the newspaper and saw Bitcoin on the front of it.
I think it might have been private emails.
Yeah.
So look, if you want to hear us talk for about 5 or 10 minutes about it, maybe check that episode.
Yeah.
But I guess it's just good to see, generally there's more adoption of Bitcoin conceptually, more adoption of it being, integrated into, payment and point of sale systems. However, this is not as good as it sounds. It's not like they're running their own node, taking Lightning transactions. They're really just using an exchange as an intermediary, which is lots of third-party risk, but maybe it's a nice, comfortable step they can take to begin with.
It's I think you actually have to use their app. I don't think you can just turn up and get a Lightning code. But it is interesting to just observe this competition that's happening for payments now. It's going to be cutthroat, I think. And clearly Lightning is going to win because it's got the lowest cost base. But yeah, just the fact that it's even, possible. I can't really work out why you would want to buy some Doge and then buy petrol with it. But anyway.
Doesn't make much sense to me either.
Yeah.
Even the first step of buying the Doge, I don't know why you would.
Yeah, don't bother doing that. Now, another one, it's quite interesting. There was a request for Australia to audit our gold. So we've got 80 tons of gold, which sounds like a lot because a ton of gold is a lot of money. But Venezuela has 160 tons of gold.
Wow.
So you wouldn't have thought that they would have twice as much gold as us.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have it, but that's what it's according to the World Gold Council. But I associate Venezuela with hyperinflation, not twice as much gold as Australia. I looked up a couple of other countries. Philippines has 159 tons. Thailand has 244 tons. And France has 2,436 tons. So I'm kind of happy that we are auditing our gold because it's in the Bank of England, and basically I don't really trust any other country to look after our gold. But then even if they had taken it, it's really not worth that much either way. Like $5.5 billion worth of gold. So our total foreign currency reserves, we looked over about 77 billion, I think it was, and this is $5.5 billion worth of gold. So it's good that we have it, but it's really not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things.
And when you think about, we're only going to be testing 10% of that roughly $6 billion worth of gold. As I say we, but the Reserve Bank of Australia senior official that's going over there is only testing 10% of the gold that they have in storage.
It's not as bad as you think. So what they do is they have a list of the bars and the serial numbers. So these are very large. I think they're 400-ounce bars. So very large bars that are worth like $1 million each. So they'll go and say, okay, we want to see this bar number. And they say, bring me that bar. Yeah. So it's actually a random audit. So if they can't do that, but then you don't know, are they pulling it out of someone else's pile? And
that's right. Yeah. And to me, I guess, because this is a all expenses, taxpayer funded trip to do it.
Yeah.
And so essentially they're testing 10% of our $6 billion, and we have really out of $77 billion of assets.
Yep.
So they're testing less than 1% of the Reserve Bank's assets.
Yes.
And the rest of it's based on a promise to say the other 90% of the gold that you have here, we're more or less going to assume that it's probably all in order, and it will remain in order until the time that we come and do an audit again in future, which could be a decade or more, or however long. So it's a very small amount. We're essentially going to verify less than 1% of the Reserve Bank of Australia's assets.
Are you suggesting some sort of node on a Raspberry Pi might be a better solution to this?
It's amazing, isn't it? When you can pretty much verify the entirety of the Bitcoin supply, holding your own keys and making sure you do actually hold the keys to that will take you less than a couple of dollars of energy to be able to do and time once you've got it set up. So it would be great if we had something like a decentralized, fully auditable asset to do in the place of something like gold, but I guess we'll have to wait.
Yeah, we might have to wait a bit before Australia owns Bitcoin. Another interesting story that I was quite interested from a local perspective, a company called Bengal Energy, which is a Canadian company, are actually using stranded natural gas reserves, and they're experimenting with taking Bitcoin miners. So I think what they do is they put Bitcoin miners in a shipping container, and they generate electricity by burning gas to power the miners, and they can take them to wherever they want to go.
That's right.
And people may not realize, but in natural gas, it has to be piped. You can't just truck it somewhere. So you have to connect the pipe to the well. So if you've got a well that's got some natural gas in it, but there's no pipe connection, you can actually, you can't sell it to someone, but you can take a Bitcoin miner to it, generate electricity, and then mine Bitcoin with it. So they're trying a very small scale. It's like $200 a day of revenue, this current scale, but they're hoping to build it up to something like $20,000 a day. So again, a very interesting development. Unfortunately, it's a Canadian company, but it's actually happening in Australia. And you can kind of see this is the larger companies are cottoning onto this as a great idea.
Definitely. It's a beautiful synergy, isn't it? Because for those companies, that buildup of gas that needs to be flared becomes dangerous if they don't flare it.
Yep.
Of course, if they do flare it, that would be theoretically bad for the environment and also bad for their like their ESG score, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
So for energy companies or miners, as in like energy miners, that is, oil miners, natural gas, etc., it's really useful for them to sell this, but also to reduce their carbon footprint. And for Bitcoin miners, it's great because you get much cheaper energy, sometimes even free in the case of these pilot programs.
Yep.
And you can go wherever the energy is.
Yep.
So my understanding is that this is an untapped resource really in Australia. And this kind of mining is really taking off over in America, especially places like Texas. So it'd be great to see some Australian companies jumping onto this as well. To me, it sort of reeks of some sort of market inefficiencies where you have an Australian company or two like Mawson International and Iris Energy. They're mining overseas. And then we have a Canadian company mining in Australia. There's something weird going on there. There's some like regulatory issues or insurance issues that are just making it easier for us to mine somewhere else and other people elsewhere to mine here instead. But hopefully that'll get sorted out in time.
Yeah, but as you see these companies kind of start to figure it out and the larger companies get involved, there's some quite cool outcomes. So one thing that was mentioned in that article is that in Norway, the miners are partnering with timber companies to use the heat to dry out the timber. That's super cool because, basically Bitcoin is integrating into the entire economy, like the heat, the energy. Like it's very cool to see stuff like that. So as it provides more benefit across the entire economy, it's going to be more incentive for governments to regulate it kindly and for it to become just normal part of life.
Definitely. In the conference, on one of the Bitcoin mining stages, there was a bit of historical context put out where energy companies, so oil miners, etc., kind of used to be as powerful as the banks. And over time, they've become far less powerful as the banks because the banks get to control the money and control a lot of policy. However, energy companies could have a resurgence as they are able to then tap more of their lost resources. When you think about 70% of the world's energy is lost through transmission or storage, if we could utilize that 70%, those companies that are utilizing it become far richer, far more influential than they are now. And then perhaps they become the banks of the future, even just in terms of their political lobbying power being returned. And if they can see Bitcoin mining as the synergy that's required, I think government will start singing that tune soon enough as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting perspective. Yeah.
So the other bit of Australian news, which is probably a bit of global news as well, is so Daz B goes by Daz B1. I'll tag him in our release of this. He's worked with a few others. So Seb Bunny from Bitcoin Magazine, as well as a few others whose names slip my mind at the moment, including Greg Foss. And they've developed a financial education platform called Looking Glass. Financial education platform. And I'll link that as well. It's lookingglasseducation.com. Now, the first course that they've released is a 3-hour seminar, which is all audio. You can read it as well, but it's good just to be able to play it in the background for convenience. And it just introduces the problem of things like fractional reserve banking, monetary expansion, our ever-increasing debt bubble, and the inflation that results from those things. And it does it in a way that doesn't jump immediately into spruiking Bitcoin. Bitcoin's mentioned a few times earlier on, and then has a bit more of a segment towards the end when comparing it with things like equities or property or bonds as potential investment strategies. And so it's a really great way for people who are not into Bitcoin at all, but might be seeing that there's a bit of an issue with like their wage or the economy, a good way to kind of introduce them, to orange pill them. The intention of that platform as well is to just produce more seminars over time that delve further into things like bonds, property, assets, like equities, that is, and of course, Bitcoin. The important part is that it's meant to be funneling people towards Bitcoin, but doing it in maybe a nicer way than what we usually do when we try to orange pill people and we start with Bitcoin rather than the problem.
Yeah, that's definitely worth checking out if you're new to it or want just a bit of a grounding.
Definitely. So global news. Now, there's some regulation, and this seems to be going back and forth over and over again in the European Union. So the European Union, which I'll just call the EU, if I have to say it again. So the EU Parliament has passed basically like a privacy-busting, I'll say crypto because it incorporates all of the different cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, but a crypto rule, basically saying that people shouldn't be able to withdraw from exchanges to what's called an unhosted wallet. By unhosted, that's a term that they've generated. It basically means like a wallet that's not hosted on a centralized service like an exchange or a bank or the government themselves or an insurance company. And The reason I say it's been going back and forth is because this was raised initially and it was more or less debated and then shot down. But then it got kind of squeezed into a bit of legislation that got passed just recently, unexpectedly. And so now it needs to go back to being debated before it comes into action. I think it's still quite likely a couple of years away from being put into action, even if this legislation doesn't get changed. But still kind of concerning to see that happening, essentially trying to say you can have Bitcoin, but you just can't hold it yourself.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is the countries and regions most threatened by Bitcoin are going to try these silly tactics because all they're going to do is push it into a black market if that's what they want to try and do.
Exactly.
So they kind of do understand the risks here, but I think Europe's not in the best kind of position in terms of, like, for example, their energy and their currency. And so this is probably a pretty big threat to, like, even the European Union potentially. So you can sort of see it's quite out of character because, you know, when it comes to privacy, they actually have some really good privacy laws. For them to take the opposite position on Bitcoin privacy is odd, right? So I think that says more about how threatened they might feel about what Bitcoin could do to their financial system and trying to just scare people off it. But realistically, you know, you could just, all this can happen in a black market, peer-to-peer. And they're better off engaging with it rather than trying to make it go into the black market.
Yeah, that's right. All they do is ban themselves and their citizens from Bitcoin, but then their citizens, if they really want, they can still route around it in black market. Yeah,
and you're right. Like, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot because let's say in 5 years they decide that they should, the companies in Europe and the European Central Bank wants to hold Bitcoin on there as an asset. They kind of can't because they've just said, no, this is this really dangerous thing that's, you know, yeah, or maybe they're just saying, no, it needs to be all centralized and controlled. So
yeah, it seems like that's the way they're going. They're saying, oh, we're going to be friendly to it, but in a way that really goes against what Bitcoin is meant to be doing.
Yeah,
I wonder if, like you say, because they're in such a dire economic circumstance, this is their way of trying to close off their exit routes. Because fact check me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Christine Lagarde that had that quote about saying Bitcoin is what does she call it? Like an exit hatch or something like that. And basically saying we need to close the exit hatches because otherwise people will use them. And she's the head of the European Central Bank, which I'm sure is probably very integral into some of this legislation that's being passed in the EU Parliament. So, I mean, I tie all those things together and think maybe there's a bit of concern that people are going to use Bitcoin to escape, therefore close the hatches, keep it all centralized. They can rehypothecate, go to some sort of fractional reserve banking and save their economy.
And try and do it all over again.
Yeah, exactly. Loop back on itself. So another bit of news out of the EU is just this quote that was said or sent to EU banks. Beware of wartime fake news triggering a bank run. It wasn't really clear what fake news that they were referring to. However, I believe it's referring to things like people becoming more aware of fractional reserve banking, the fact that if less than even 5% of people's wealth gets withdrawn from the bank runs out of liquidity to then service all the other deposits that they're responsible for. And so if this starts to circulate on social media, that psychological factor in and of itself could lead to a bank run. So regulators are telling banks, just be prepared. There could be some fake news that causes a bank run. Don't really know what they're going to do about it if it happens, whether it's a bail-in or trying to stop servicing for a while. But either way, they have this on their mind.
Yeah, I guess the question is, why did they feel the need to make that public? Like, it's almost like you're saying this is a problem, you know, and now they're drawing attention to it.
There's no better way to start a bank run than saying, "Whoa, watch out for a bank run."
Yeah, bank run would be bad. Don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there must be some other hidden message there we might be missing.
So another one, which it's a very frustrating bit of news. Just when you think the energy FUD is really starting to die in the Bitcoin space, it gets revived again. Almost every 6 to 12 months, it kind of comes back with some new sort of perspective. So Greenpeace has been pushing this campaign called Change the Code. And they've done this because they received $5 million of funding from Chris Larsen, or as he's sometimes called, Chris Ripple, because he's the co-founder of Ripple. So Ripple has given funding to Greenpeace to launch this Change the Code campaign, which essentially says there's only about 50 people who need to make the decision in Bitcoin to change the code from proof of work to proof of stake. And because proof of work is so bad for the environment, which it's not really, but that's what they're saying, Bitcoin should move to proof of stake, like all the other good environmentally friendly cryptocurrencies. So, I mean, there's a lot of rubbish in there, obviously. It's not as simple as just 50 key players deciding to change the code because it's a consensus mechanism. Bitcoin is not governed by governance, it's governed by consensus, which means that everyone would need to run the code. One person could change the code if they wanted to, but that would be called a hard fork if it's going from proof of work to proof of stake. And of course, the whole premise of this campaign, which is that Bitcoin uses too much energy and it does it in a wasteful fashion and it's not doing anything useful for the world. And they also had, again, the old kind of tropes of saying Bitcoin uses this much energy to, verify this many transactions. They've kind of completely disregarded things like Taproot, Lightning Network, side chains, etc., which it's actually far greater transactions can be verified for the energy that they're talking about. So lots of different kind of points of issue in there.
Yeah, that's why it's so interesting seeing the oil and gas companies enter, and then like whole countries like El Salvador, because to them $5 million is nothing. So if they want to have $20 million to lobby the government, this campaign will be nothing. So I think the incentives are going to start playing out where actually people who have surplus energy, some of those hydropower mines across the world. I think there's just one in Canada that could power the whole Bitcoin network if it wanted to.
But multiple times over is my understanding of that stat, where it's something like it could do it 17 Bitcoin networks if it wanted to just of this one wasted hydropower. So, ludicrous stuff.
This sort of stuff might create a noise in the short term, but I think as you start to see, ExxonMobil and huge companies like that realize, we can actually monetize our stranded natural gas. Greenpeace are going to be realizing they're going to be $5 million is not going to be much to go and lobby government. So that's why I'm really happy when I see announcements like ExxonMobil starting to mine Bitcoin, because the incentives are just playing out beautifully.
That's right. Do we talk about this in this episode, or was that last?
I think we have about last
episode.
The previous one.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds very familiar, and I know that's happening. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just a matter of time until the lobbying power starts to shift the other way. Incentives are. It's the beautiful part about Bitcoin, isn't it? Incentives are going to keep pushing it forward regardless. But this is very telling for Greenpeace from an ethical perspective, that they would accept funding, not do any of their own research, and then just push out a campaign that someone's paid them to do. But maybe I just give the benefit of the doubt a bit too much for these organizations. I don't know.
I think, unfortunately, that's kind of their modus operandi.
Yeah, absolutely. So another two bits of global news here is that Trezor has had a data leak through MailChimp, which is their way of contacting customers through things like newsletters. And so no information about people's wallet balances or anything like that, or private keys have been leaked, because that's not how it would work. It's just things like email address, names. I don't think it's even things like personal home addresses. It's just email address and names. But unfortunately, what's happened is that the attacker who got this information has been sending out phishing attempts to Trezor customers, saying via email things like, look, Trezor's been breached. You need to download this new software. And once you download this new software, load your Bitcoin wallet into it, and then you'll be secure. And of course, that is not really the valid software. But they sound very convincing. There's been a couple of big name people in both privacy and security that have mentioned that they've either almost fallen for it or have fallen for it, but then managed to kind of fix it up before it was too late.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of pretty good rules here. First is never ever put your seed phrase into your computer.
Yep.
Like you should only ever have to put it into your hardware device. And even then, because you're choosing to, not because you're getting an email. So it's a pretty good rule, because even it sounds like obvious to say that, but we heard of a person who fell for the Ledger one, the Ledger phishing attack. And the only way you would fall for it is by putting your seed phrase into your computer with your keyboard. So never, ever do that.
That's right.
And then we had the episode recently about email privacy. So you could, for example, use an OnAddy or a different service to have an alias. And you might choose to, after you've finished working with that, you've bought the product, you just turn off that alias. So that way you're kind of protected from this situation as well.
Exactly right. You'd never even get the email. And better yet, no one would even know that email is associated with you and that you bought a Trezor. Other bit of news here is, I guess, just kind of a fun one. This probably doesn't change a whole lot, but the Tennessee Titans, which is an NFL team in America, which is their gridiron or American football, they're the first team to adopt a Bitcoin standard. So doing something very similar to Perth Heat over here, which is a baseball team as a part of the Australian Baseball League. And they're going to be holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, accepting Bitcoin for merchandise, for ticket sales, and then offering all their staff and players Bitcoin for salary. So that's both Perth Heat, which most people should know about, but also Tennessee Titans over in America and now doing this too. So very cool.
Yeah, awesome.
So in terms of some technology stuff, there's a Bitcoin bounty website now called bitcoinbounties.org. So this is just an amalgamation of all the various Bitcoin bounties that are out there. And what a Bitcoin bounty is, just very quickly, is someone saying, look, I need something developed for either my wallet or my service that I'm working on, and I need a developer to do that. And if a developer can do that, then there's this much Bitcoin up for grabs. So an example of that that's quite prominent at the moment is Blue Wallet has put out a bounty. Can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's something like maybe 5 or 10 million sats, which is not huge, but it sweetens the deal a bit, to have someone develop BIP47 paynims for Blue Wallet. And so there's quite a few other bounties there. So if you're a developer or you know a developer who wants to get into Bitcoin development, that's probably a good place to look. There was an article that was released as well, which is just worthwhile mentioning and checking out, from Econo Alchemist. And it's all about how Samurai Wallet, Whirlpool, their mixing implementation, which is also accessible through Sparrow Wallet too, could have fixed the issues that came about from the Canadian trucker protest, in the sense that most of the Bitcoin that was sent to the Canadian trucker protesters was traced, and something like 30% of it has been seized, and the other 70% is still being tracked and waiting to either be seized, which is not the best. I understand they did that through kind of ethical and moral decisions about it, which is no point kind of getting into the detail of. However, it has raised some people to say, like, Bitcoin's not private enough. Bitcoin couldn't have done anything to circumvent this. However, there are many things that could have been done. Samurai Whirlpool is just one of them. And Econo Alchemist has gone really well into the detail about what exactly does it mean if someone had used Samurai Whirlpool? What would someone looking at that on chain trying to trace it? What's the arduous process that need to go through to still not even be able to trace it? So worth a look if you're into Bitcoin privacy, and especially if that was concerning to you to see a lot of those protester funds frozen or traced.
Yeah, it was certainly a disappointing outcome what happened. But I guess if we all learn from it, then that's, part of the journey.
That's right, exactly. So mempool space, so mempool.space, which is a really great place to keep an eye on things like the block height, future blocks, how crowded the mempool is, what the likely fee is going to be based on how crowded or not the mempool is. They've now updated their service to provide some mining stats. So it's just mempool.space/mining. And that has things like what's the next difficulty adjustment likely to be? When is that going to happen? What's the timing of blocks at the moment? Is it running high or low? Who is discovering each block? As well as, generally speaking, how many miners are there? So just cool stats if you're into Bitcoin mining, or even if you're not and want to kind of learn a bit more about it, /mining on top of the usual mempool.space and get a bit more info. Another point here is that Intel has launched their new second generation Bitcoin mining chip called the Blockscale. So this is different to the Bonanza chip, which they released earlier this year. The Blockscale has not been released yet, but it's going to ship apparently in Q3 later this year in 2022. So they're just producing the ASIC chip itself rather than the full ASIC miner system. So it's then up to whoever buys these chips from them, which is usually some very large Bitcoin mining institutions, to then either produce their own ASICs or go to one of the current ASIC producers to have it all pulled together. And so it's anticipated that this new chip that Intel has come out with will be able to produce something like 148 terahashes per second at around 3,860 watts, which is more efficient than the majority of miners that are out there at the moment, but a bit less efficient than Bitmain's S19 XP, which does around 140 terahash for 3,010 watts. However, these are all theoretical numbers at the moment because none of them have been delivered, and there has been a bit of a history with these things being sometimes overpromised, delayed, and then not actually doing exactly what they said they would. So we'll wait and see. But interesting news nonetheless.
But it's certainly competitive because the previous chip wasn't competitive, right? But this one is competitive. Like theoretically, it's better than the S19, which is the best you can actually buy right now.
True.
So, it's pretty cool that that's coming out in America. Hopefully they assemble it in America, and so you've got some kind of geographical security there. And again, it's another thing just sort of helping Bitcoin become more prevalent and, just get rid of these silly Greenpeace campaigns and so on.
Exactly right.
So, and they didn't talk about the price. So for some users, like if they can get free power through their natural gas, they might be quite happy with it being 10% less efficient than the best if they can get access to it sooner or it's slightly cheaper or whatever it is. I think post-COVID, having it in your own country is a really big advantage.
Definitely. And I think that's probably part of the push here is trying to decentralize the chip manufacturing. I know TSMC which is one of the current 2 chip manufacturers. I guess you could say 3 now because Intel's doing it too. But TSMC is setting up a foundry in Texas, which immediately decentralizes some of that production. But Intel is also setting up in America, I think multiple locations, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic.
So last bit of tech news here is Taro, which I mentioned at the top of the show when discussing some of the announcements from the conference. So Taro is actually just an acronym for Taproot Asset Representation Overlay. That essentially, just to repeat a little bit of what I said earlier, enables the issuance of assets on Bitcoin, both on-chain and Lightning transfers of those assets. And those assets could be anything from stablecoins, shitcoins, NFTs, that kind of thing. I've heard a bit of drama about this, where apparently this is very, very similar to RGB, which has been around for about 3 or 4 years, perhaps, and does a very, very similar thing, but doesn't utilize Taproot for it. So this is just taking the same concept, I believe even the same mechanisms by which it worked, but then integrating it more into what Taproot is capable of. So I don't know. If you're keen to know some of those inner workings or machinations, that might be worth looking up. But still, I think having a competitor to RGB, and they're both open source, so this is the way that this industry works. They've innovated on it somewhat. Still going to be great for users, I think, especially if you want to buy some shitcoins on Bitcoin.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you could kind of see in the future, maybe you could issue a footy ticket on this. That like as an asset, and then you go to the footy and you basically, you kind of display it through Lightning or something.
That's right.
Like this tech is really powerful, I think. And it's sort of hard I still haven't got my head around like how Lightning works. So to think there's another layer coming on top of Lightning, and who knows like how else this is going to evolve. I think it's crazy what opportunities there are. And no one's really talking about this. They're talking about the other cryptos.
Exactly.
But I think eventually it's all going to sit on this stuff. Probably someone will build on Taro and call it something else, but this will be the tech that delivers it.
True. I guess a benefit that I can see is that if you want to hold a stable coin, so if you want to hold some USDT or something along those lines, at the moment, you need to trust other blockchains. So you need to trust Tron, or you need to trust Binance, you need to trust Ethereum, and then, of course, the fees and everything that goes along with that. Whereas if you were to have USDT on this Taro implementation, your USDT is kind of underpinned by sats, which means it's the stability, the security of the Bitcoin network, which is just a very cool thing. So you're still holding USDT, but the blockchain that it's sitting on, the underpinning infrastructure, is more secure. And you're, of course, giving your patronage, I guess, to the one that you want to win out. Well, look, that's probably it for news. That's like a whole lot of news, and I feel like in the next couple of weeks we'll have a whole lot more too. So, if you've enjoyed this, think it's going to be useful for anyone, please share it around. Before we close out, Jeremy, any final comments?
I just hope you get time to have a rest, Justin.
I know it'll be
sounds like you had a massive weekend.
I do feel like Bitcoin is just like ramping up in terms of the news. Some of it you can cluster it together, but it's still exciting just to see so much happening in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Again, reach out to us if you have any comments or suggestions. The Twitter handle is hardblockbtc. Thanks for listening, and until next time.